Korean architecture scene, it's like insecurity and self-hatred mixed together in a way. They don't command as high fees as international architects. We always make is that, oh yeah, fees are always higher in France or in the US, so we have to match their fees.
They're 10% out of the construction fee usually. In Korea it's 4%.
That's right. And if we're going to meet foreign standards, why can't we bring the standards up here? Why just say, oh yeah, well Korean architects are always working at 4%, so let's just keep it. In a monetary way, very simple. They're paid less and so they're valued less. So that really projects down into how you feel. And then all the byproducts of that feeling is that, oh well, you know, we're not as creative. And so it's a self-perpetuating problem. And therefore you sort of become a follower rather than a leader.
Hi channel, this is Wonje Lee from Architecture Recipe. Today we have Professor John Hong from Seoul University, 서울대학교. Welcome to joining us with us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, I'm excited.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about who he is and what kind of practices he's focusing on and how he has done it, and what's his architecture philosophy.
I'm a misplaced professor, which means that I didn't have the goal of becoming a professor, but as you know, a lot of young practices in the States, they have to have their feet in two doors. Mainly it's a financial thing. I had a small practice and it doesn't sustain itself. So I was just teaching on the side. And luckily, I went to the GSD, so I had some connections there, and the faculty there are so nice. And so they said, oh, just come and teach a studio here and there. Ended up being a more permanent position. And I just ended up teaching there for 7 years. And then immediately after that, well, there's a little a stint at UPenn, and then I came to Seoul National University.
Maybe I should start with like your nationality or like your identity. Because you're Korean though, but then when did you go back? I mean, go to a state, and how did you like high school period
and end up there? So. I was 6 months old when I moved to the States.
Oh, really?
And so the first language I learned was English. And at the time, there were no Koreans in the community, and you easily forget Korean. Also, the parents really want you to assimilate. They always want their kids to become part of American culture. So my parents were speaking English at home and doing that. So my Korean is bad, and I wish we could have done this in Korean, but next time.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe there's another interview 10 years later when I'm old.
You're sort of like Korean, but also you're like fully American, but you're kind of re-immigrant back to Korea. So do you have any like struggle when you like settle down in the beginning of your practice or find a project?
When you first come here, it's very energized, and things seem much easier than it is. You know, when I first came here, there were projects, teaching was okay, and the clients were very welcoming. But the longer you stay here, and the more Korean, quote unquote, you become, the less foreign you become, the harder it becomes. Yeah, so I think there's something sort of under the surface that in the architecture scene where clients are still insecure about their ability and their role in making great architecture, and they look towards international sources, whether they're looking at international magazines or hiring international architects. There's a kind of insecurity about Koreanness, about architecture. So the more Korean I become, the less, quote unquote, trade value I have, as you know, I'm not being foreign. There's a sort of honoring of foreign ideas are always considered better in and of themselves, even though it's not necessarily so.
Because this is just new, or it's not local ideas. So.
That's right, and I feel like the confidence isn't there. We were just talking about K-pop and K-drama and K-movies, and the lack of K-architecture. I feel like the confidence about Korean design is not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
And not that I could single-handedly change that culture, but I want to try to contribute to it by teaching, just giving students more confidence.
Maybe a lot of students or public might interesting about when you initiate your project or design, what's your initial thoughts and process or philosophy you have in it?
One of the things that I always think about design is always a language. I always think, first of all, it's a language. Of course, it's material and it's things and spaces and things like that. But if you think of it as a language, then it opens up a lot of possibilities. So, for instance, how does it communicate? I mean, the most basic one is how does it communicate to the people using it, and how do the people that use it get cues about how to be in the space?
When I look into the Dulwich Library or one of the housing project you did, contemporary Cheongja, I see something going on and your vernacular is starting over and over, and which might be interesting for Korean architect, because this industry having a language sometimes like people think that this is like meaningless or not like beneficial for their company.
That's right.
Even though they're like atelier or the studio.
That's right. And maybe they begin to speak the language too much of what their client wants, and they're pushed that way.
Right.
Contemporary Cheongja was commissioned by a client that wanted a listening space for their incredible audio system. You know how in Korea this is really popular to have like really high-end audio. But while he listens to music, he would go there on weekends or lunch breaks. While he listens to music, he wanted to get the best views. So it's sort of visual and listening at the same time. But the views all of them weren't that great. At first he said, "Oh, I want a glass box," but some of them weren't that great. So there's all these historical sites around his property. So we just focused the views to those areas, and then through that focusing, you create a really deep window and bring light and things like this. So it was a really simple exercise of combining oral, hearing and seeing together and making a language out of that. And similarly at Dulwich, we use the same kind of apertures because the kids there, they're young kids, they're up to maybe 8 years old that use this library. I wanted them to experience it like a city where you can go up into a tower or you can visit different spaces and then get these sort of focused views, and through those views build relationships between the students. Instead of just having a big open space where you don't know where to turn to. If you focus different areas, the students actually begin to interact with each other. So in contemporary Cheongja is more about looking out. At Dulwich is about looking in and out. And so Dulwich is a more kind of advanced version.
Interaction and a dynamic interaction with the kids and with different levels. And
That's right.
and that was very interesting to me, that you have like a different layer of the net or hammock spaces and let them interact, and how you end up like having that idea.
One of the head of school, Jane Smith, she's very wary about what digital lifestyle will impact the young kids. Just being on the screen the whole time. So it's important for them to learn computers and things like this. But she wanted somehow more hands-on interaction with the books. So that's why the hammock and those things were put in, so students can really interact with the space. And since the students are relatively short, you can only get to the bottom of the bookshelf. But if you put a hammock, you can get to the whole bookshelf.
Right.
So they can interact much more directly with the books and increase that interaction.
When you look into the Korean architecture industry or the style, do you see any difference between compared to the United States or European architecture?
And I realized, talking to especially the younger lecturers and the faculty that are teaching studio at SNU, wow, they have a hard time doing these buildings. These, a lot of small offices will start with kunseng, as you know, and that is a really hard act to follow, because not only is there the strict zoning law, which always inevitably ends up with this kind of shape, you know, it's
Right.
like a box and then a slope to do with this sunlight. So you're, in a way, you're given that general outline, and then the pressures of the client. Most Korean clients I've noticed are really well versed in design.
Well educated too.
And that's one great thing about working in Korea. But at the same time, the land value and all those kinds, they just want to max this thing out. Let's make sure we use everything in that little narrow thing. And so it really is a kind of AI project. AI might be able to do it better, just put the core where it's most optimized. So much energy goes towards optimization, rather than thinking about the streetscape, rather than thinking about the overall context. Sometimes these massings actually, the given massing doesn't match the context, and it's not their fault. And so you get a lot of boxes, and you get a lot of these trapezoidal tops. So I think it's very hard. The kunseng type is a really hard puzzle to put together. This idea of optimization, I think that aspect is ingrained in Korean urban planning, and you know, even road networks like optimize it. But as we all know, optimization isn't always the best. When you always try to optimize for one thing, something else suffers.
Right.
And you have to look at the whole thing cohesively. So I think there's a bigger problem in Korea that has to be taken care of at the city and political level. Songpa area, for instance. That area used to be just a lot of boring kunseng, but I think Songpa-gu has designated a kind of art street, or no, they kind of give it like a cultural designation. They're trying to sort of promote pedestrian activity, and so if you have a larger agenda, like let's make pedestrian activity, and let's create open spaces and things like this, then I think the buildings can get more creative. But with these individual lots that are just zoned out, it's hard to get creative. And then at the same time, some architects, the more they practice, the more they get pressured by this, and then they're afraid to stick out and try something different, because they're going to be nailed back in, you know.
So no matter what, they're gonna change it back to the box shape. Or
Exactly.
conventional shape.
That's right. And then you just sort of accept it, and then you just start making the same thing again.
You're compromising it.
That's right.
Worker or as a participating in this architect industry, I have a lot of responsibility to catching up with the world like trend or the globalization of trend in architecture field. What do you think about it? Is there a thing that we need to fix or improve it, make it better in this industry?
I definitely think so. Way that I can see it in the harshest terms, but the way, if I can interpret it, is a kind of professional self-hatred in a way. The Korean architecture scene, it's like insecurity and self-hatred mixed together in a way. They don't command as high fees as international architects. You know, it's very subtle, but it weighs on the psychology, I think, of being a practitioner, because the institution just supports it too. Like when architects get invited for competitions, for instance, international competitions in Korea, the foreign firms always get more money actually to participate than the local firms. So so in the very simplest terms, and they also command higher fees. But the excuse we always make is that, fees are always higher in France or in the U.S. So we have to match their fees.
They're 10% out of the construction fee usually. In Korea, it's 4%.
That's right. And if we're going to meet foreign standards, why can't we bring the standards up here? Why just say, Korean architects are always working at 4%, so let's just keep it. So from the client side, it puts pressure on the architects to in a monetary way. Very simple. They're paid less, and so they're valued less. So that really projects down into how you feel. And then all the byproducts of that feeling is that, we're not as creative. And then because when foreign architects are invited, they're more invited to sites with more freedom in it, and they don't have the zoning regulations like these Kunseng sites do. Of
They don't
course.
care about it.
That's right. That's right. Or they're like, oh, I don't want to. Yeah, like you said, I don't want to deal with that. And they design something else, where we're more Korean architects are more model citizens. And they feel like they have to really abide. So there's that kind of unfair starting point, I think. And also, I think clients are more willing to bend the rules for foreign architects still.
Right.
So there's so many things pitted against the architects themselves, and then it becomes a feedback loop. They can't put pressure back onto the client because they don't have the clout that a foreign architect does, you know. And so it's a self-perpetuating problem, and therefore you sort of become a follower rather than a leader.
Right.
And yeah, I don't want to blame any young firm because I know how hard it is.
But then, like at the same time, when we're thinking about Japanese architect or European architect, they're great. They're just or Danish architect. They're just out there in the world and just they're like do whatever they want to do.
Bold, yeah,
Right.
Much
But then,
bold,
yeah,
much
but much
bold.
bold, right. Thank you for joining us, John Hong from Seoul National University, and we're here with John. And thank you for watching us, and please subscribe us.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Yes.